This was a meetup event on May 6th, hosted by Agnostic Agile, with speaker Jeff Gothelf on Inspect and Adapt: How to Ensure Your Career Stays as Agile as Your Work.
I'm going to share a talk with you all for the next 20, 25 minutes or so. And then I would love to kind of take your questions about anything that I spoke about or anything about Agile or anything else you'd like to talk about after the fact. There are a couple of points during this presentation where I will jump in and or jump out of presentation mode and may ask you a question and ask you to contribute your answers in the chat, just to kind of keep the interactivity high on this and not have to not force you to listen to me talk for a while. But look, this is a really interesting conversation for me. It's been a unique one because, as Nabil mentioned, I started off as a designer, moving into the Agile world, and then these days doing a lot of executive coaching. Really had this idea for this book, Forever Employable, in my backlog for years, and then recently got the motivation within the last year or so, got the motivation to write it. And so I'm going to share with you the story about this particular book and kind of how I got around to it, ask you some questions along the way, and then happy to discuss this and everything else as well. But I think one thing you'll notice as well is that as I start to talk about this, there are some key themes here that should resemble agility, right? Or as this meetup is called, agnostic agile, right? So rather than a specific methodology, but the actual principles of agility. So I hope you'll recognize that, and I'll call that out as we go through it. So story starts about when I was 35 years old. When I was 35 years old, this is what my kids looked like. Today, my daughters are teenagers. Thankfully, I haven't aged a day, which is perfect. Now, since then, look, this is everything was going pretty well for me when I was 35. I was already married. I had a couple of kids, a house, a couple of cars. I was living outside of New York City in New Jersey. But then I wake up on the morning of my 35th birthday, January 31st, 2008. And I wake up in a cold sweat. I wake up in a panic, and I kind of am terrified when I wake up that morning, and I'm trying to figure out why I'm terrified. And because up until that point, up until the day that I turned 35, I had a pretty good run, for the first kind of 10 plus years of my career. I started off as a broke musician. I played piano in bands for a long time, toured around the United States, and that was fun. And when I got tired of being broke, because being broke gets old very quickly, the internet happened, and the internet was a really nice thing. And so back in the late 90s, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job. And I could do a little bit more than spell it. I could actually mark it up. And so I got a job in the late 90s at a company called IXL, one of the big Web 1.0 consulting companies. Shortly after joining as a front-end designer and developer, which is a glorified title, all I wrote was HTML, was markup. I got handed this book. This book is called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And for me, this was a transformational moment. This book was written by Lou Rosenfeld, who I count as a friend these days, and Peter Morville, who I count as an acquaintance. I just haven't run into Peter as much. And this book changed my life because it got me thinking about, well, there's other aspects of software development that I could be involved in, not just sort of the final end of the waterfall. I was at the tail end of the waterfall, and I didn't like that. So I wanted to move upstream, and I started heading down this path of information architecture and user experience design, interaction design, kind of as the web became slightly more interactive. But as I was heading that way, oops, the dot-com bubble burst, kind of like the pandemic of the early 2000s, if you will, right? And all of a sudden, I find myself bouncing around for a few years, looking for jobs every couple of months, right? Moving around. I worked at America Online for a little while. I got a job out west on the west coast of the United States at a company called Web Trends, where I started leading a small user experience and design team. And then about 10 years into my career, I found my way back to New York City as the director of user experience for a company called The Ladders. Now, it's 10 years in. I'm 35 years old, and I've got a pretty good job. Like I said, I had a pretty good run. I survived the dot-com bust. I managed to stay employed, and I clawed my way up to the middle, right? I became a middle manager very proudly about 10 years in. And then I wake up, so I'm 35 at this point, And I wake up on my 35th birthday and I'm terrified, right? I've got this cold sweat. And what I realize is, at least what dawns on me, is that in 5 years, when I turn 40, I fear that I'm going to be overpaid and unemployable, right? Because I already had a nice salary, right? How many more design management jobs were there coming in? And I was seeing this happen with my colleagues who are a bit older than me, struggling to sort of continue to find the next step up, particularly in the design field. In addition to that, all of these younger, hungrier, smarter, faster, better designers were coming into the field. And I felt like they were coming after my job. And perhaps most importantly was they were cheaper than me as well. And I really felt like I was going to be unemployed by the time I was 40. I was going to be kind of old, expensive, and unemployable. So, which is kind of funny looking at it from this side of 40, right? And 40 is not so old anymore for me. But on the morning of my 35th birthday, I decided, then in that cold sweat, I made a resolution. And the resolution was this: I was no longer going to look for jobs. That panicked updating of my CV, applying for jobs, interviewing, and doing all that, I'm never going to do that again, right? Instead, what's going to happen? Jobs were going to look for me. Work was going to find me. That's the resolution I made on my 35th birthday to avoid what I believed was obsolescence within the next 5 years. And I recognize that maybe that's a mind-blowing concept, right? Certainly you can say all the words that you want, right? And that's awesome, right? But, right, that sounds great in theory, but there are a lot of questions to answer once you declare this kind of resolution, right? I'm no longer looking for jobs. Jobs are going to find me. And there were at least 4 questions that I wanted to ask myself, right? The first one is this: does anyone know who I am? I mean, the year's 2008. Has anyone ever heard of me? Do they know who I am? How would they even think of me at this point, right? Second question: why would they look for me? What problem am I solving for them? In other words, what is it that I could help them do? How would they find me, right? I think I had an about.me page maybe in 2008 and a LinkedIn profile, and that was about it, right? How would they find me? How would I make myself findable? And ultimately, if this is happening, right, if I actually get jobs to look for me, what kind of jobs do I want, right? What kind of work do I want finding me? And how do I make it crystal clear that this is the kind of work that I want, right? And so these are the questions that I'm asking myself. But let me ask you this question really quick. So before I move on, I want to ask the group a question, and I'd love to see your answers in the chat. And I'll drop out of presentation mode so I can kind of see the chat in a second here. But here's the question I want to ask the group in the chat really quick. If you could just kind of type an answer in. Why would people look for you? In other words, why if someone was looking for you, what's the problem that you solve for them? If you can think about that for a second and put that in the chat, I'd love to see your answers really quick. I'm going to drop out. So what problem do you help people solve, right? Why would people look for you? Let me just look at the chat for a second and see what's going on here. High energy problem. What kind of problems do you solve, right? Joe, like that's what I'm talking about, right? What's the value? Like what are people coming to you? What problems are you solving for people? Software development. Excellent. There's a lot of software developers out there, right? Agile turnaround, right? Stuff is stuck and not moving, right? Network is the asset. Getting teams to be high performing, exactly. Bringing people together, that's a problem you can help solve. Transforming operating models, right? That's right. What we're looking for, right? People are going to seek you out because you're going to help them solve a problem, business agility problems, exactly. And again, like a person of value to address business challenges is great, right? What kind of challenges are you helping people address, right? That's the kind of stuff we're looking for there. Exactly, getting people to be autonomous, agile ways of working outside of IT. That's really interesting, right? Exactly, that's the kind of stuff that I was looking for as well. And so as I was thinking about that kind of stuff, there was a lot of options that I could go down, exactly. So why would anyone look for me, right? And so what I've done is I've spent it says, but it's really the last 10 plus years answering this question and building a platform around the answers that I found to those questions. And what I've learned over the last 10 plus years is that I believe that there are at least 5 qualities to becoming forever employable, like to building this platform and this reality where jobs find you, right? That's the key, right? Answering those questions. And I took 5 concrete steps to getting there. And if you add all those things up, the big learning is this: to build the kind of platform around yourself, the kind of expertise, the kind of network around yourself, the kind of thought leadership. You have to treat your career and your professional development and your expertise as a product, and as an agile product as that, and using the kind of the philosophies, the principles of agility to move that product forward over time. Let me show you what I mean by that and how we move that forward. So there's 5 qualities that I talked about to becoming forever employable, right? And these are those 5 things: entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. And if this sounds familiar to you, it should, because this is agile, or more importantly, this is agility. These are the same exact kind of qualities that we bring to bear on our products and services, but instead we're focusing it on ourselves, our career, and our professional development and growth, right? And as I started to do this, as I started to create this platform and this conversation around myself, I started tapping into these qualities, even though I actually didn't believe I had most of these qualities. The first one was the toughest one. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, you know, and I was always an execution guy. Someone else had the idea and I helped bring it to fruition. But it turns out that there are lots of things that I've done in my life that don't fit the classic Silicon Valley entrepreneur story, but definitely are those kind of entrepreneurial ventures. Like, for example, I played in bands for a very long time. Bands are startups. Anybody in a band that's trying to make it as a paid musician knows this, and knows that this is an entrepreneurial venture, right? You're out there with a team that you've built, that you've recruited. You've got some crazy ideas, and you're trying to convince the world that they should buy and invest in your ideas, right? You're trying to find that product market fit. So I drew on that, right, that experience to say, okay, great. I've done this before. I can be entrepreneurial. Self-confidence, right? Self-confidence is tough because if you're going to start a conversation around yourself and build this platform and this network, right? What are you going to talk about, right? Where is that self-confidence going to come from, especially in a space like Agile or software development or IT, for example, because it feels like, especially today, everything has already been said about that. But the reality is that no one has your story. No one has taken the exact same steps that you've done. Your experience has value. Your knowledge has value. And so you always have something valuable to add to the conversation. So if you look back over your life, you try to find all those pieces that led up to where you are today, and you start incorporating them into your story. And that starts to create this unique value proposition. For me, my self-confidence came from telling stories about my time in the circus. I spent 6 months traveling with a circus back when I was 22. It was a crazy thing to do. It was kind of awful for a long period of time. I didn't really enjoy it, but I survived. I learned a ton about myself, and it helped me build my self-confidence. And I've got that story to tell, right? And no one has that story, really. I mean, maybe there's some other folks in tech that have done some time in the circus, but for the most part, there aren't that many of us, and that helps me move forward. Continuous learning, reading, speaking with others, engaging with community like we're doing now, right? Using that to build new learnings and to kind of try new things, to leverage that self-confidence and try new things. That's what happened with reading Information Architecture for the World Wide Web and a ton of other books moving forward, right? And this is the only way to progress as an Agile practitioner, right? If you're not continuously learning, like our products should be, our teams should be continuously learning about our products, then you're stagnant. And just like your products, you're going to be out of business soon. I've taken those learnings over the years, and they have driven me to continuously improve how I do what I do. I do a tremendous amount of teaching these days. One of the ways that I continuously get better is I teach with other people. This photo is from a recent workshop back when we can do workshops in person, not too long ago, with my pal, Jeff Patton. Jeff Patton and I teach together because we learn from each other, and we improve our teaching, we improve our skills, our facilitation, our material, and our content. And I'm always looking for ways to improve on what I'm doing. And then ultimately, right, this is something around, there's an element of reinvention here that keeps you continuously relevant to the conversation, right? So if you came in early to the meetup, you heard Neil say that he's been practicing Agile since '92, right? That I guarantee you, he's been reinventing how that practice has been going, right, over the course of those years, because the technology has changed, the markets have changed, consumers have changed, organizations have changed. I'm also bringing some of those ideas to places that where they didn't exist before, right? So bringing this product thinking, this design thinking, these principles of agility to non-product teams like human resources, finance, legal, and legal and marketing, right? That's something that I've been doing a lot of lately as well, right? So continuously reinventing. Now, look, these are the 5 qualities that I believe it takes to start to build this forever employable platform around yourself. Now, I wanted to show you very quickly how I took those qualities, and I took 5 steps over the last 10 plus years to really build this particular platform. And the 5 steps are these: plant a flag, tell your story, follow the new path, teach, and give it all away. So this by far is one of the most important steps that you can take. It's planting a flag. Now look, planting a flag means I'm going to make a decision to own this slice of the conversation, right? So if we're talking about agile or agility or transformation for these organizations, right, what part of that conversation are you going to own, right? One of the folks in the chat, when I said, why would people come looking for you? Somebody said software development. That's great. You can be an excellent software developer, right? But where is that unique aspect? Like your software development in healthcare, your software development for a particular type of technology, right? Now you might be multifaceted, but what part of that conversation are you going to own, right? The people who've done this well, right? You know them right away, right? I mean, we could do this very quickly. I'm sure you know this, right? Eric Ries, right? Eric Ries's flag, lean startup, right? Jake Knapp, what's Jake Knapp's flag, right? Jake Knapp planted his flag and he said design sprints. That's what I'm going to talk about, right? Over in Switzerland, we have our friend Alex Osterwalder, right? Alex Osterwalder planted his flag. What was it about? It's about business model generation, the business model canvas, right? These people become synonymous with this conversation, right? And that's ultimately our goal. And for me, right, I planted my flag, bringing agile and user experience together, ultimately resulting in lean UX. So that was step number 1, right? Lean UX. Step 2, tell your story. Once you've planted your flag, the idea is to start telling your story as often as you can to your teams, to your colleagues, to meetups, to webinars, podcasts, presentations and conferences, whatever opportunity you have, because the goal is to get better at storytelling. And the better you get at storytelling, the bigger the audience gets, right? The bigger the conversation gets. I gave my first talk about Agile and UX at the big Agile conference, the annual one. I can't remember where it was in 2010. And it was called Beyond Staggered Sprints, how to move sort of beyond sort of the mini waterfall of staggered sprints. This is 2.5 years now after my 35th birthday. I applied to speak, right? And I took my time before doing this because I wanted to have real material to share with people and real experience, real photos and that type of thing. A month later, I'm in Paris and I give the first Lean UX talk ever, right? The first talk that actually talks about Lean UX. Again, 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. Fast forward about 6 months and I get my first really big break. 3 years after my 35th birthday, so I'm 38 now, I published this piece in Smashing Magazine, which at the time had 1 million readers. Today has even more. It's called Lean UX, Getting Out of the Deliverables Business. And this takes the conversation global, right? All of a sudden, I can now have this conversation on a much bigger stage, and I'm getting better at telling the story because I've been practicing. I've been on a bunch of stages. I've been tweeting about it. I've been writing about it on Medium. I've been sharing updates on LinkedIn. I've been talking about it on Quora, answering questions there. I was even blogging about this, writing about this on Facebook. I was sending a newsletter, right? Whatever channel was available to me, that was the channel that I was using to tell my story. We even considered very briefly to do Lean UX the musical. It was that all-encompassing, but we stopped short of Lean UX the musical. Mercifully, we didn't do that, but now look, why did my story resonate? Why was I getting traction with this particular story? And I think this is the formula as you're starting to plant your flag and tell your story, right? I solved a real problem many people were having. How do you combine Agile and user experience design together? I had actual real world experience, right? I worked on this problem with my team and with other colleagues to try to solve this. I didn't do it by myself, right? And I shared our work transparently. I shared our wins and our losses, and we got it wrong a lot. And that showed humility, right? That shows humanity and humility, right? And everything I ever put out there provided practical, tactical advice for the people who were reading this stuff. And what that does is it builds an authentic connection with the people who are reading your stuff, right? So you're telling your story, you're getting better at it, and you're building that connection, you're building that audience, you're building that platform, and opportunities start to come your way. Now, as those opportunities show up, new paths open up, right? New paths open up for you to take, and you have to decide what to do. How are you going to lean on that entrepreneurialism and that self-confidence to move forward? The ironic thing for me is that as the Lean UX conversation was growing, I was doing less and less design work. Now, you remember when I turned 35, I was already worried about better designers coming into the field doing better work than me. And now I'm doing even less design work, right? And this is a real conundrum for me, right? Do I keep having this conversation, or do I go back and do design work? Now, at the time, I was starting to travel around the world pretty regularly, speaking at conferences, teaching workshops, working with organizations around the world, and a new path opened up. It turns out that this is particularly true at tech conferences. Book publishers go to conferences and they look for who's speaking about the latest topics, and they offer book deals. I got offered a book deal to write the Lean UX book. And again, this is a new path for me. And I said, look, okay, I'm going to lean on that entrepreneurial spirit. I'm going to lean on that self-confidence. And I said, sure, why not? I'll write this book. Except there was one big secret that I didn't tell O'Reilly, the publisher. I didn't know how to write a book. Longest thing I'd ever written at that point was about 500 words. And I was terrified about that, right? But you jump in with both feet, and you kind of see what happens. Now, look, this was a painful process, right? But you can look at it as luck, or you can look at it as preparation for this opportunity when it presented itself, right? I was ready for this opportunity because I've been talking and teaching and telling this story. Now, look, it was a brutal process. It took 2 years to write this book. I went through 3 editors, and I wrote 4 full manuscript drafts before it was finally published. It was a tough process. I wasn't sure the book was ever going to get published, right? But I did get more time to talk about it and build up suspense so that when it did finally launch 5 years after my birthday, right? So I'm 40 years old, right, when the book launches, right? It launches to great fanfare, and it really starts to fundamentally change my life and what I'm doing, and really expand this platform and this network as new opportunities start to flow in, right? Jobs are finding me. I'm not looking for jobs. Now, we've got those 3 steps. The 4th step, what I realized had become, what had happened, not necessarily on purpose, was that I'd become a teacher. I recently ran into the former VP of product at Netflix, Gibson Biddle, and he and I are doing similar things these days. And he asked me, he said, what do you like best about your job these days? And I said, I like teaching. I'm a teacher. And I never set out to be a teacher, but everything that I do today, right, is an opportunity to teach, to help share what I've learned, to help people improve. And so I say yes to almost everything, workshops and conferences and webinars and podcasts, because when I teach, I get to practice the material. I get feedback on the material. I improve my storytelling. I get a real sense of where the mechanics of the ideas resonate, where they can use updating. I take away from the people who I work with and I coach very regularly, and that improves what I do as well, right? And so as you think about this, I'll do a quick deep dive into just one of these. I spent a lot of time teaching in workshops, and I find that workshops are a terrific way to really exercise your ideas and improve your storytelling. Obviously, you can generate some revenue from them as well and leads for other business. And then ultimately, this starts to open up new paths as well. So again, you're telling your story, you're getting these teaching gigs. The teaching gigs gets you other teaching gigs or maybe some job opportunities. Things start to flow in proactively instead of you having to go out and look for it. Now, the last and final step, this took me the longest to learn, which is giving it all away. This is really interesting because what I find is, and particularly in the Agile community, is that the more that I give back to the community, the more that I put out there for the community, the same amount comes back to me as well, right? Whether it's in collaborations or friendships or projects or initiatives, some new things to work on, which is really fantastic, right? And the way that you do this by giving all your stuff away is you have to make your work and yourself easily findable and accessible, right? So you need a presence in social media. You need a website that's yours. You need, to really kind of have a consistent message out there. For me, right, everything that I've done, everything that I do is up on my website. You can see my writing. You can see my talks. You can see agendas for workshops and podcast listings. Nearly all of it is free. And the stuff that I do sell tickets for, right, are the trainings and the workshops that ultimately lead to other work as well. So make yourself easily findable, right? Post everything online, give it away, because stuff comes back. Like people can watch videos of my keynotes on my website, and they still call up and say, "Hey, I saw that video of you. Why don't you come in and give that at our company?" Right? Every time I travel to a city, or at least when we used to travel to a city, and I do a paid event during the day, I try to do a free event for the community in the evening. And that's, again, giving back, meeting folks, helping the local organizations, building friendships and relationships in those organizations, doing those meetups and those events for free. And again, you're building goodwill, you're building community, and selfishly, you're continuing to improve your material. Now, to wrap this up, and then I'm happy to take your questions about this or anything else, it's a few things to remember. If you're going to start to build this platform, if you're going to plant that flag, you have to stay active. If you're going to stay relevant in the conversation, you have to stay active. And that means just participating in the narrative, whether it's through writing or conversations on LinkedIn, Twitter, private Slack groups, contributing to the canon of work, showing up at meetups, leading these meetups, whatever it is, you've got to participate in the conversation so that people know that you exist. It also helps build your material as well. As you think about evolving your career and reinventing over time, once you set a destination of where you'd like to get to, start the next thing at least 2 years before you'll need a new topic. That's been my experience. So for example, I'm moving a lot of my agility practice and conversation. I'd like to bring that to bear in the HR world, in the human resources world. But technically speaking, I don't have any credentials in that world. I'm not an HR person. I don't have any experience in that world, but I've been starting that conversation for the last 18 months to the point now where I'm starting to get invited to participate in conversations about agility in HR and agile HR and that type of thing, right? Last 2 points, and then we'll wrap this up. This is my path. It worked for me. I hope it works for you. I hope you take away something practical from this. I hope you start to build this platform and this network, right? But if it doesn't work for you, right, there are other options to build this, right? There's executive education teaching, adjunct professors, there's academia, there's all kinds of things that you can do to do that. But this is my story, and I thought I would share it with you. And as I think about sort of how to sustain this, how to make this truly forever employability, I think about this quote from Bezos that I really like. People ask Bezos all the time, what's going to change in 5 years? And he says, I don't worry about what's going to change in 5 years. He goes, I focus on what won't change in the next 10 to 20 years. What will people always need? What will there always be a demand for? And I focus on that. The channels will change. The formats will change. The language may change, but the needs stay the same. And I would urge you to think about the values, the problems that you solve, the values that you bring to bear in your work, right? What are the things that are never going to change in your target audience that would allow you to be forever relevant and forever valuable to those folks, and ultimately forever employable? So kind of keep that in mind as well. And so I'm just going to wrap this up and say thank you for having me, and thank you for listening. And I'm happy to take your questions about any and all of this stuff. The book, just a quick note about the book. The book is in, you can pre-order it on Amazon now. You can go foreveremployable.com and see everything there. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here in just a second. And if you'd like a free copy of the book, you can go to that link and enter the drawing for that as well. Okay, the book will be out in about a month or so. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing out of this, drop out, and I am more than happy to take any and all of your questions. Let me just drop that link in here. This is the link for entering the raffle for the book. And if you want the slides, by the way, you can go to this URL and I'll happily share the slides with you as well. So with that, Nabil, what questions do we have about any of that stuff?
So first of all, very big thank you, Jeff. That was an incredible talk. I can see from the comments that it's really resonated with some people. Normally we do a round of applause, but you'll just probably get me because everyone else is.
Can I show you? So let me show you something. So yeah, this is one of the things that's been totally bugging me about these virtual meetups is that we can't, like, applause doesn't happen, especially because I facilitate a lot and someone does a nice job and we're like, yay. So I found this app. Check it out. Hold on. It's got and so. Okay. And so I recognize that was applause for me, but I just wanted to show you that, that's what I'm doing. That's how I'm facilitating applause these days in my meetups, right? Let's just turn on the app, and it's got 3 different levels. Anyway,
it's a lot easier than getting 85 people to unmute and start clapping.
Yeah, exactly.
So guys, if you have any questions, I'm sure some of you have, please use the chat system for now, just to avoid, a whole bunch of people unmuting and talking at the same time. So any questions, just type in the chat, and then it'll be a bit easier for us to start answering them.
Yeah.
I think I saw a question. I think Carsten has the first question. Carsten, if you'd like to now, I'll select people one by one. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question, that's also perfectly fine. I'll give you a second to reply.
Yes. So my question is, Jeff, I'm getting into this content creation in the upcoming weeks, and it's really time-consuming. So are you employed during your building your flag for a topic of UX in Agile?
Yeah. So when I started, I was employed full-time, for sure. I was writing about the work that I was doing at work all the time. And I agree with you. It is extremely time-consuming to continue to build this, this foundation of material and content. I did it whenever I had a free minute. Generally speaking, this was I was still living in the U.S. and commuting to New York City every day. And so I had 45 minutes or 50 minutes on the train in each direction. And immediately I'd get on the train, hopefully find a seat, headphones, laptop, and just start writing. Maybe I'd get up before my wife and kids would get up on the weekends and spend an hour or 2 writing, and really sneaking in the time to get some of that material written and then ultimately published. Today, the situation is similar. While I'm self-employed, there's still a lot of work that I have to do to kind of keep the content going, and between project work and family, I'm still kind of squeezing in time here, time there to create the content. So I get it, but if it's important to you, I would, initially it's an after hours thing. It's kind of like in the cracks between everything else.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for the question. Okay, the next one, and there's a couple that are similar in the same vein, from Sandeep. Sandeep, I'll give you a second if you'd like to unmute and ask your question. If not, I can read it out. I just realized I was talking on mute. I'm so good at this facilitation thing. Okay, I'm being muted automatically. I knew.
Yeah, I don't know why that's happening, but
okay. So Sandeep, you have a question. I'll give you a second to unmute if you'd like to ask it yourself. Okay, so the question from Sandeep and a couple others that are in the same vein were, how do you choose what to specialize in? If you've been in roles like product owner, scrum master, how do you sort of go about choosing which one to focus on?
Yeah, great question. So choosing where to plant your flag is probably the toughest thing to do. And I think that there are, if you think about it kind of as a Venn diagram with 3 circles, the things that I would look for in one circle would be your areas of expertise and experience and your passions, right? So what have you been doing? What are you good at? What do you have experience doing? And then what else do you really care about, right? So not just your professional stuff, but think about your personal stuff as well. Like, for example, when I was thinking about this stuff, I was thinking primarily about, professional stuff, but I happen to be a keyboard player in bands. And at the time I had a collection of vintage electric pianos. And I happen to know a lot of stupid information about vintage electric pianos. I put that in there, right? I mean, maybe that's something that I'd consider talking about and really planting a flag around that. So add in your passions as well. The second circle is trends. So what trends are you seeing? Technical trends, cultural trends, consumer consumption trends, socio-political trends, right? What's happening in the world? Where's the world sort of heading, right? And then I think the third circle is really thinking about audience size. Where are people congregating? Where are they meeting? What do they care about? Where are audiences growing? Where are audiences diminishing? And if you can find sort of the confluence of those 3 things, you should be able to identify 2 to 3 or 4 potential places to plant your flag. So then the opportunity is then to take a lot of the stuff that we know and love about agile product development and to start to test and learn and continuously improve a few of those ideas, right? So instead of just saying, all right, I'm gonna start making videos, YouTube videos about how to do sort of whiteboard-based facilitation and invest 10 grand in a home studio and cameras and lights and microphones and that kind of thing, right? You want to experiment. You want to float some tests, right? So point the iPhone or whatever your phone at yourself and record a 5-minute thing and publish it on Twitter or on YouTube and see what kind of reaction you get, right? Run that experiment, collect some evidence and see if you get that traction. And you can run a couple of those concurrently before you really start to test, start to get some feedback about where that slice of the conversation is that you can really have an impact on. The third book that I wrote, Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, is a perfect example of this, right? I had been having a lot of conversations with clients about the challenges of reconciling lean startup, agile, and design thinking in one team. And so I started tweeting about it. And man, did that resonate. Those tweets took off and the conversation on Twitter became very, very active. So I took that as evidence from the market that there's something here. And I wrote a 500-word blog post about it on my blog. And that went viral. And so I took that and expanded it to 1,000 words and published that on Medium. And that became the best read thing, the most read thing I've ever published on the internet up until about a year ago, right? Again, increasing levels of effort, increasing evidence from the market that this is good. So that went on. I was like, okay, I can expand this to a little book. Took it out to 6,000 words. I've sold over 10,000 copies of that book these days. And it helped us launch Sense and Respond Press. It was a bit of a test for Sense and Respond Press, this book publishing business we have on the side as well. So that's a really good example of that, of testing those ideas, seeing what resonates, and then investing based on evidence, right? So very much, ship, sense, respond, think, make, check, inspect and adapt, build, measure, learn, like all of those loop diagrams, right? With the circles, right? That's what we're doing here.
Incredible, great answer. Very similar to agile product development as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Laura Morgan, I believe you had a question. Would you like to ask it?
Hey, Laura.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Laura.
yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. My question was, if there was one thing that you recommend we all do tomorrow to help our future selves, what would that be?
Such a good question. One thing you could do tomorrow to help your future selves. I would say start writing. That's what I would say. If you don't already write, start writing. It's one of the things that I think is. I wish I had been taught it more growing up. I wish I would have paid more attention to it in university. And it's something that certainly I'm impressing on my kids now, my teenagers, just to kind of get really good at communicating, because I think that the better storytellers that we become, the more successful we are at our jobs, right? And it doesn't matter what we do. And again, storytelling in whatever format or channel works for you. So if writing is hard for you, and not everybody is interested in writing, then record a podcast or record a short video or make a little movie or whatever it is. But figure out what your communication style is and practice it. Because look, the way that we're successful at work is we convince others to come along with us. The way that we do that is by telling them compelling stories, right? User stories were always meant to be that as well, right? When Kent Beck sort of invented user stories, it was like, don't tell me what to build, tell me a story about what we're building, right? What's the story? And then convince me that it's something worth building, right? That to me is I think it's the smartest thing you can do immediately, is to just start right. And to be clear, you don't have to be good at it, and you don't have to think you're good at it either. One of the most humbling moments for me, so Lean UX version 1, first edition was published in 2013. Second edition was published in 2016. In 2015, when we went back, we got hired again to write the second edition. I had to go read the first edition because it had been a while since I'd read the first edition of the book, right? And I went back to read it to see what we would update in the second edition. And I was horrified going back and reading Lean UX first edition, just seeing, I was like, I couldn't believe they had published it. And in the 4 years since we had submitted the manuscript until we got to write it again, I had become such a better writer simply due to the act of writing, right? It's like exercise, right? You get stronger by exercising, you get faster, you get more endurance, same thing. And so just start putting stuff out there and then get feedback and just keep doing it. I think that that's the best investment you can make right now.
Fantastic, thank you.
Brilliant. That's very similar to some of Jordan Peterson's work, if you guys are familiar with him as well. He strongly encourages writing. It helps relate to your thoughts. It helps you understand your opinion on a subject. By writing it down, it's becoming a bit more real than just thoughts in your head. So I've heard this advice from psychologists like Jordan Peterson. So yeah, definitely great advice. Next question, Neil, I believe you had a question. Would you like to ask it? I can see you trying to find the mute button.
Oh, yeah. I got my question. That's what it was. Oh, yeah. So that was it. Recognition is greater for those who specialize. That's pretty clear, especially for what you said. But from what I've seen over the years, there's a small window of opportunity to raise your profile. What steps have you taken to take new paths and abandon the ones that you'd been relying on, that you'd previously specialized on?
Great question. What I think I've learned about myself over the years, especially the last kind of 10 to 15 years, is that I'm an optimist. I wasn't sure about that for a long time, but I think I'm an optimist. And here's why I say that. So Lean UX comes out, and I'm spending all of my time talking, teaching, training, coaching, how to bring Agile and UX together. And it's resonating broadly, and I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. But at the end of every session, at the end of every workshop, without fail, I would get at least one or two people, and sometimes more, coming up to me and saying something to the effect of, "That was great. I wish my boss was here." And I'd say, "Why?" And they would say, "Well, because my company doesn't work this way," or "I don't believe my boss will let me, my boss will let us work this way," right? And I keep hearing this over and over and over and over again, right? Which could be devastating, right? In a sense that, like, I found something that seems to help people do better work, but they can't actually implement it. But for me, I see that as an opportunity, right? And particularly with my co-author and business partner, Josh Seiden, we saw that as an opportunity. We said, okay, great. We're delivering something of value to the product development teams. They're saying, look, there's a blocker here for us to be successful, and it's the bosses. So Josh and I hypothesized that we could create a conversation with the bosses that would convince them to change how they manage their teams and their organizations. And the sense and respond work came out of that. And that was a really big challenge for us, because at the time, both of us were designers, just like our CVs were comprised of design jobs, basically, strictly. And our goal was to write a business book and to get published by a business book publisher, because that's how we believed we would create that conversation with the bosses, is that we would write a business book. And again, very different process, very brutal, but ultimately we succeeded, and we got the publishing deal with Harvard Business Review Press. We wrote Sense and Respond. It took a couple of years. It's been out for a few years now, for about 3 years now, and that it helped expand and grow that conversation. And again, super risky, right? The business world, in many ways, had no reason to listen to us, right? A couple of designers, the business world rarely listens to designers unless their last name is Jobs or Ive, right? And so that's an example of that, where you kind of run up against these roadblocks, and then you just kind of see an opportunity. The HR thing I was talking about is another example of that, right? So the Sense and Respond work expanded who I was talking to, and kind of pushed me up in the corporate hierarchy. So now I'm talking to executives, right? And then I keep kind of running up against the ceiling where I can't have any more of an impact. And for me, that was heavily in kind of HR, kind of the chief HR officer. A lot of stuff was kind of hitting a roadblock in the HR department. And so for me, I was like, if I can influence these folks, then I can have a greater impact and increase the agility of these organizations. And so again, I see those not as roadblocks, but as opportunities to reinvent and expand and stay relevant and move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Maybe one or two more questions, if that's okay. And then we can wrap up and go back to our evenings. Paul, you have a question. I will not attempt to say your last name because it looks difficult to pronounce. But Paul D. something. I'll give you a second to unmute if you'd like to ask. Otherwise, I can.
Yeah, I think he wants you to read it.
Okay, sure. Can find it. How are you continuing to learn now if you are not doing or executing as much?
Yeah. So look, I'm not designing products, but I am actively working with a variety of companies in a variety of sectors and a variety of sizes around the world, whether it's in a coaching capacity or a training capacity, whether it's any kind of development of consulting work with these organizations. And at times, the teams that I'm working with are building products. And so I get smarter by putting myself into uncomfortable and more difficult situations. I'm learning by expanding the types of organizations that I deal with, the scope of the organization. So for example, I'm doing a tremendous amount of work right now with a big telco in India. So there's a couple of folks on the call from India. They'll recognize the name if I said it. And that's really interesting for me from a variety of factors, right? It's a huge company. It's a telco. There's all kinds of cultural stuff that I'm learning, and that's helping me become better at my job. And so that's how I keep getting better and smarter. So I'm just not I'm not doing the tactical design or implementation work at the moment, but I am kind of engaged in programs with these organizations on a regular basis. And that is a tremendous way to learn. And I seek out the opportunities. So again, jobs find me, right? That's the goal in all of this. And then and the question becomes, well, what kind of jobs do I want to find me? Well, if you look at my writing, right? My writing for the last year and a half or so has been largely focused on organizational transformation, digital transformation, business agility, org design. And those are the kinds of gigs that I'm getting. Those are going to be big company gigs. They're going to be challenging and messy and difficult. And I like that work. So that's how I'm doing it.
Great. Thanks for the answer. Should we wrap up with one final question then?
Sure.
Okay. The final question is Joe Hawkins. Would you like to ask a question?
Hello. Good evening. Thank you,
Hi.
Jeff. That's amazing. It's just resonated so much with me tonight. Unbelievable. I guess we've all noticed that LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter has changed quite significantly in relation to the current situation, with lots of people with diametrically opposing views, like learn a new language, go and do yoga. No, I can't. My kids are all crumbling around me. So have you got any suggestions for how you would break in terms of the entrepreneurial side of things when there's just quite a lot of noise, conflicting views? For me personally, a bit of LinkedIn exhaustion, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is a tremendous amount of noise right now. You're right. And rising above it is tough. Look, here's what I think works, right? Here's how I think you rise above that. And it's a long play, right? It's a long play because I think in the short, even if you get if you can get a big hit right out of the gate, that can go away very, very quickly. So number one, consistency. So consistency is really important, right? You're going to talk about the thing that you're going to talk about consistently in all of these different channels and all of these different conversations and all of these different places. So that's number one, right? So wherever you've decided to kind of plant your flag, consistently talk about that, so that when they say, look, I need somebody who's done Scrum Master work in healthcare, right? That's Joe. Every time I see a post from Joe, right, it's Scrum Master in healthcare, Scrum Master in healthcare, right? Mark, I don't know how to say his last name, Graben. He's very good at this, right? He's sort of the lean healthcare guy, right? And everything he posts is about applying lean, not lean startup, but lean, actually, like Toyota Production System kind of stuff, into healthcare systems, right? And so there's consistency there. I think engaging thoughtfully in others' conversations is really important, right? I think one of the worst things that you can do, even if you vehemently disagree with somebody's idea, is to immediately confront them, and instead kind of engage in a thoughtful, respectful way consistently. That starts to build respect, right? Hey, this person may not agree with me, right? But they're at least respectful and they're willing to debate this with me. And I think that goes a long way, right? So consistency, thoughtfulness, and I think ultimately humility, right? So humility is really important in that, to say, if for example, I have opinions that I've changed over time, right? Things that I was very, very adamant about 5 years ago that I don't believe anymore, or that I've changed my mind about. And I'm willing to say that, right? And I think that shows growth. And again, all of that humanizes you, and it starts to draw people to you. And I see that as a real benefit here as well. So I think at the very least, that's a great place to start, right? And then look, the more that you can lean on friendly networks to support you, like stuff, and upvote it, right, from a kind of mechanical standpoint, that starts to elevate it as well. But generally, I think consistency and thoughtful engagement wins.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jeff, so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Incredible. Okay, guys, we could probably stay here all evening asking questions, but it's really sensible to call it at some point. I'd just like to take, again, a very big thank you to Jeff for giving a very insightful talk, which I think has touched quite a few of us on the call. So a very big thank you to Jeff. Thanks for everyone for taking time to attend the meeting. Hopefully we'll see you at the next meetup. Do not forget to click Jeff's link and fill out his form for a chance to win a free copy of his upcoming book, Forever Employable. So the link is in the chat. Please do click it. I'd rather that we don't send it on the meetup, because then a lot of people who didn't actually join the call will get to participate. So make sure you click it for a chance.
You put in the work. You deserve the free book.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been an incredible evening to spend with you. Take care. See you at the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. See you later. Thanks, Nabil.